Hey everyone, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on driving mistakes that can kill your engine. Internal combustion engines aren't designed or meant to last forever. They're subjected to immense amounts of heat, stress, and wear and tear over the years, and oftentimes most automotive internal combustion engines are only designed to last about 200 to 500,000 miles. However, there are some driving habits and some mistakes that you could make in driving and owning your vehicle that can actually shorten that lifespan and really put additional strain and wear and tear on your engine and shorten the longevity and reliability of your engine. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump in and discuss some of the most common driving mistakes and habits that can kill your engine. Number one on the list, we have revving your engine or driving and accelerating aggressively on a cold engine. So with a cold engine, you have cold engine oil, and oil has higher viscosity at low temperatures, meaning it's a little bit thicker and doesn't move as quickly throughout the engine, which means on a cold engine, the oil isn't able to properly lubricate the engine and all of the rotating assembly and components within the engine. So ultimately, any form of aggressive driving or revving the engine on a cold vehicle can be very bad for your engine and shortenly reduce the lifespan and longevity of your engine. So drive gently, accelerate slowly when your engine is first warming up. That doesn't mean that you have to leave your car sitting there idling for 10 minutes to warm up. So ideally, your oil and coolant temperature should reach at least 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit before you really start beating on the engine a little bit. And ultimately, before you start going wide open throttle, ideally you would let it warm up even hotter to about 160 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the normal operating temperatures of your vehicle. Again, the main point here is on a cold engine, just drive gently, allow it to heat up, and as you start getting some heat in the engine, you can start accelerating a little faster and driving a little more aggressively if you want or need to. Moving on to the second driving mistake, we have lugging the engine or overloading the engine. Basically, what overloading or lugging the engine means is accelerating with too few RPMs. I know this might sound a little counterintuitive, but actually engines operate a lot more efficiently with a lot less load and stress at higher revolutions per minute versus giving it more throttle at lower RPMs in a higher gear. So a lot of the times you might see these magazines, blogs, or videos testing various performance aspects of vehicles, showing certain times like 50 to 70 mile per hour acceleration times, full throttle in the highest gear possible, like 6th or 7th gear. While this can be beneficial sometimes, and you may need to do things like that, it's best to avoid that in the longer term and don't do that too often. At that point, you're really better off dropping a couple gears, increasing those RPMs, and going from there. A large part of that is because engines make more horsepower at higher RPMs, and horsepower is the ability to do work. And so really riding the engine at too few RPMs is putting your engine under higher loads and higher stresses, and you end up lugging the engine by giving it too much throttle at lower RPMs. This mostly applies to manual transmissions and vehicles with paddle shifters. Typically, if you have an automatic transmission, especially modern vehicles, if you give the vehicle a certain amount of throttle and hit the gas hard enough, a lot of the times it will downshift to the appropriate gear to really find that good balance of higher RPMs and getting a bit more power without lugging the engine. But again, if you have a manual transmission or paddle shifters, don't just get in the habit of flooring it in 6th gear at 50 miles an hour. Go ahead and drop it down into 5th or 4th gear, whatever you need, depending on how much acceleration you may need, and go from there rather than lugging the engine at lower RPMs. Moving on to the third driving mistake, we have driving for too many short trips or short distance trips. Engines are really designed to operate at their maximum efficiency once they get up to proper operating temperatures. So driving the engine while it's colder leads to a lot of different problems. It can increase the amount of carbon buildup, and additionally you can have more fuel dilution of the oil. And this is important, especially because on colder engines, metals heat up as they expand. Engines are designed to have wider tolerances between the pistons and cylinder walls, and as that engine heats up, those pistons start expanding, and that closes the tolerance or closes that gap. So on a cold engine, you get more fuel mixing with the oil, and ultimately, if you don't get the engine up to operating temperature often enough, that starts diluting the oil. On the other hand, if you get the engine and vehicle up to operating temperature, that should burn off a lot of that fuel that mixes with the oil and help prevent against any fuel dilution in your vehicle's engine oil. Now, I know this can be challenging because some people may work a few miles from home and really not have to commute very far, and if that's the case for you, then that's certainly fine. Just make sure once a week or once every other week, you're taking your vehicle out for a slightly longer drive, a 30 to 45-minute drive, to ensure it gets up to full operating temperature and has a little bit of time driving at that point, since again, that can help burn off things like carbon deposits, burn off any fuel that may have mixed with the oil, and a lot of other things. So again, avoid doing too many short distance trips, and if you have to do a lot of short distance trips, just go out for a longer trip from time to time and ensure you are getting that engine up to full operating temperature. Moving on to mistake number 4, we have shifting gears before your vehicle has come to a complete stop. Now, I know most of this I focused on engine specifically, however, this is much more related to your vehicle's transmission than it is the engine. This is personally one of my biggest pet peeves when people drive automatic transmission cars and are still reversing and going a mile or 2 miles an hour and just suddenly slam it into drive and start accelerating and driving off. That is bad for your transmission, and while modern automatic transmissions are very capable and tend to be very reliable, they can handle some of this abuse and stress. However, there's really no need to do that, and all it does is subject the transmission to additional stress and wear and tear. It doesn't have any positive benefits for the engine or transmission, so just don't do it. Make sure you let the vehicle come to a complete stop before switching from park to reverse or drive to park or whatever order you're going in. So ultimately, that's a pretty simple, straightforward one, but I know riding around with a lot of different people, that's something that I see a lot of drivers do, and a lot of people make that mistake where they're constantly shifting between gears without coming to a complete stop. Moving on to our 5th and final mistake on this list, we have driving through deep water. Now, this should be the most obvious one on the list. However, I still see people do it all the time. Anytime there's been a flood or any deeper water, I'm sure we've all seen it, the flooded and stranded cars and cars stuck on the side of the road with hydro-locked engines. So if you come across deep water, make the smart decision, make the safe decision, turn around and take the longer route. I know sometimes that's easier said than done, especially if you're in a rush and you just want to get somewhere and you see some other cars making it through the water and you think, oh, if they can make it through, I can make it through as well. However, that's not always the case, especially if you're seeing bigger trucks making it through and you have a much smaller sedan or coupe and try to drive through the same water. It might not be the same outcome that those trucks or larger vehicles had. So ultimately, make the safe, smart decision. Just don't drive through deep water if you don't absolutely have to. If it's life and death, maybe you have to take the risk and try to get through it. But in other cases, if there's another way around and it simply requires rerouting 10 or 15 minutes, do that and protect your engine from a silly mistake of driving through deep water. With that being said, I would like to point out as one final note, if you determine that the water is safe to travel through, make sure that you go through it at a very slow speed. If you go through water at too fast of a speed, that's going to cause that wave and that wall of water to start pushing up over the hood of the vehicle, and that's when it's going to get pulled into the intake. Anyway, guys, that wraps up the 5 biggest driving mistakes that can kill your engine faster. In summary, it's a lot of pretty simple stuff to ensure you're maximizing your vehicle's reliability and longevity. Let your engine warm up before revving it or driving it aggressively. Use RPMs and downshift rather than lugging your engine and trying to accelerate quickly in a high gear at very low RPMs. Very simple, but something that's often underlooked, especially with manual transmissions or paddle shifters. Sometimes it's more convenient to just slam the gas pedal and not have to deal with shifting, but just go ahead and downshift a gear or a couple gears and get those extra RPMs instead of lugging the engine. Next, allow your engine to reach full operating temperature from time to time. If you're someone who frequently does a lot of short distant trips, just make sure you take your vehicle out once a week or once every couple weeks. Again, take it for a 30-45 minute drive, allow it to reach full temperature, and stay there for a little bit to help burn off any potential oil in the fuel, any carbon deposits, so on and so forth. Moving on to number 4, more so focused on your transmission. Ensure all 4 wheels come to a complete stop before shifting from park to drive, reverse to drive, whatever the case may be. Just make sure you come to a complete stop before shifting gears. And then last on the list had the kind of basic and hopefully mostly obvious factor of don't drive through deep water. And that ties into a couple other things. Don't make any silly mistakes mistakes. If there's a risk that puts your personal safety in danger or your engine's safety in danger, then take the longer route, drive around, don't take the risk and go through that deep water and potentially get yourself stranded or start floating down a river or anything that may be dangerous or completely kill your engine and vehicle. Anyway, guys, that wraps up our video for today. If you appreciated the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more in the future. Thanks, everyone.